First City Focus is supported in part by Duke Energy, powering the lives of its customers and communities. Online at duke-energy.com. Andy Ellerman of First City Wealth, serving Vincennes and surrounding communities to help with investing and planning for your future before and during retirement years. First City Wealth online at firstcitywealth.com. Colonial Assisted Living. Colonial is an assisted living residence promoting independence and dignity for each resident while providing the necessary assistance for daily living. Colonial Assisted Living, 1622 South Hart Street Road in Vincennes, 812-895-1504. And by donations contributed by Vincennes PBS viewers like you. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to First City Focus. I'm your host, Allison Bowers. On this episode, we'll get an in-depth interview about domestic violence in the first segment of Beyond the Headlines with Dave Foster. We'll also learn about mental health resources for campus and the community during the back-to-school season with Kathy Evans. Then the annual Suicide Prevention Walk took place, bringing awareness and honoring loved ones. The theme was United in the War, and we have the story. Direct from the outside track here at Vincennes University. We'll have these stories right now on First City Focus. The recent murder investigation in Vincennes has sparked new discussions about domestic violence. News Director Dave Foster recently talked with the Knox County prosecutor about the case and the efforts to address this issue locally on our new digital series, First City News Beyond the Headlines.
It was on August 5th this year that local resident Taylor Hendershot died following a shooting outside a 6th Street business in Vincennes. 32-year-old Dylan Allen Smith charged with murder and remains in the Knox County jail without bond. The case has raised several questions, including why the death penalty cannot be sought, and also it has brought forth some issues concerning domestic violence in the community. And here to discuss some of those issues is Knox County Prosecutor Dirk Carnahan. We thank you for being here with us today. And we do want to say, before we move into the discussion, that the defendant is presumed innocent until otherwise proven. So let's just start out, for those who may not be familiar with the legal process, just explain why the death penalty is not an option.
Okay. Now, and I want to make it clear, I'm not talking about a specific case, but just about the death penalty in general. The death penalty in Indiana is kind of a mirage. The fact that we have a death penalty makes some people happy. The fact that it's almost impossible to use makes other people happy. In order to even request the death penalty, according to statute, you have to be able to prove certain aggravating factors. And they are not the typical aggravating factors that you would think of. You know, I see people throw around the word premeditated a lot. The word premeditated doesn't appear in Indiana statutes anywhere. It's not an element, it's a TV word. It's got nothing to do with real life. In order to seek the death penalty, you have to prove certain aggravators, such as if a defendant has a previous murder conviction. Now, think about that. How practical is that? How many people do we have out wandering around with a murder conviction who would actually commit another murder? Another one of the aggravators would be that a person has committed another murder even though they've not been convicted of it. There are other aggravators, things like dismembering the victim, decapitating the victim, burning the victim to dispose of the body. If the murder was in fact committed in a church or a school, while church services or while school was taking place, if the person was in a prison or a facility at the time. There are a number of exceptions like that. They're all very narrowly tailored, and none of them apply in this particular case that you mentioned. And I got to tell you, you know, over the years, I have prosecuted, you know, I was the chief deputy here 30 some years ago and tried a number of murder cases then, have tried a number since I was elected prosecutor. None of those would have been applicable for the death penalty, even the fact that some of them were pretty gruesome. I think maybe the fact that social media is much more prevalent now, and people, when they feel frustration about something tragic, like the case that you mentioned, that, you know, they want to lash out and talk about things, and that's probably why we're discussing it. But it's not even an option whether I wanted it to be or not.
So what potential penalties could a defendant be facing in a case like this?
Well, in a case like this, the normal penalties are the murder penalties where we're talking 45 to 65. And I've also sought a firearm enhancement. If you commit certain crimes that are on a list and you use a firearm, and murder happens to be one of those crimes, then you can get an additional 5 to 20 years, and that would be up to the judge. So the defendant in this case is looking at from 45 to 85 years.
Now, you put out a post on social media shortly after the incident, and you talked about the criminal record. Why did you feel it was necessary to kind of talk about that in this?
Well, you know, a case like this is an opportunity to actually help victims of domestic violence or survivors of domestic violence who are out there who are struggling with whether or not to come forward. They're trying to get the courage to come forward. And when they see people who are really uninformed about specific facts talking about how the system let someone down, or it makes them less likely to gather the courage to come forward. And in this case, there were a lot of comments about how the system, now I'm not going to talk about Illinois because apparently there's some legal matters going on in Illinois and I don't want to comment on those, and if they drop the ball somewhere, then that's a question to ask them. But whenever you want to talk about the system here, this particular defendant, the only thing he's had in the last 14 or 15 years was a resisting law enforcement, which the judge set an appropriate bond on, and he posted the bond and then went to Illinois to deal with the charge there. Before that, if you're talking about Knox County and the Knox County system, what this defendant has are all minor offenses. He's got a battery offense, a misdemeanor battery offense from 14 or 15 years ago, where he was in jail on a drug possession. Other than that, we're talking about underage drinking, possession of marijuana, trespass, theft, nothing that would have allowed, now this was before I was prosecutor, but still there's nothing that would have allowed the judges at the time or even the prosecutor at the time to keep this person locked up. Definitely nothing that could have sent him to prison, and certainly nothing that would have had him still locked up at this time.
Yeah. And you talked about domestic violence. Mm-hmm. This case has brought it back into the forefront, and I think it is much more prevalent in the community than many people realize.
It is. It absolutely is. I think a lot of our caseload consists of domestic violence now, unfortunately. And I don't know whether it has become more prevalent or we're doing a better job at detecting it and a better job encouraging and empowering people to come forward. But whatever the reason, we are seeing more of those cases now than we used to.
Yeah. And when cases like this happen, you can't stop people from going online and saying what they want to say, and there's misinformation out there. So I guess, what would you say to someone who wants to spread misinformation or don't know what's happening and gets online and goes off?
Well, that's just human nature, and it's brought out, and the worst part of it is brought out by social media. The people who are loudest and talk the most are generally the ones who know the least about a subject. When we're talking about domestic violence or a murder case or a child sex abuse case or any of the really terrible cases that we deal with every day, it's easy to be frustrated and want to lash out. And when you don't have information and do that, you don't really accomplish anything. And what it does, particularly in domestic violence cases, you have victims who are sitting out there today. We have victims today who are sitting out there thinking about coming forward, wondering if they're going to see tomorrow, wondering if they or their kids are going to be injured or homeless or die. And they're reading things on social media about how the system let somebody down and the system won't support them and the system this and the system that. They read that, it's really easy to be discouraged and not want to come forward. There are others who are already in the process who, because of the numbers, their trial date has been moved 2 or 3 times. And they're wondering if there's ever going to be an end to it. And now they're reading, nobody's going to support you, the system's going to let you down, this is going to end badly for you. Why should they continue to be brave and fight the fight that they're fighting? So that's why it becomes important for me to address misinformation and try to let people know there's no one in the system, whether it is a law enforcement officer, to the paralegals in my office, to the prosecutors in my office, my investigator, my victim advocate, even the judges and the court staff. There is no one who wants someone who commits domestic violence to get away with no consequence. There is no one in that system who wants to see any of these victims or survivors hurt or harmed in any way again. And so we do what we can do, and sometimes it's a stacked deck for a number of different reasons.
Yeah. And so if people are victims or they want help, they can certainly contact Hope's Voice, like you mentioned, or even your office or
Yes.
the police, right?
Yes.
So, is there anything else you'd like to cover that we haven't? Any message you'd like for the community to take away with what we've talked about today?
I think if you really want to see domestic violence decrease and you want to see consequences increase, you want to see fewer people hurt, fewer people harmed, fewer kids growing up in bad situations, then we have to educate people and we have to empower the survivors in these cases to be able to come forward and advocate on behalf of themselves. That's really difficult to do, and honestly that becomes the problem in most of these cases. I can tell you 30-some years ago I had a woman calling me at my house who was a victim in one of these cases and saying, please dismiss the cases against my abuser. He's a changed man, we're going to be married, things are going to be great. I refused to do so. My boss at the time had a different opinion, and he offered a deal where the man got out. Just a few days later, he murdered her really brutally. That's not been the only time either. I mean, it was maybe last year. I'm sitting in a bond hearing and trying to keep a domestic violence abuser in jail, and his victim was on the stand testifying to the judge. The judge was a fill-in judge just here for that day, not from our county, telling that judge, we're going to work things out. You need to let him out. I need him in my life. And I'm telling this judge, this is exactly the kind of person who's going to kill her. The judge let him out. He said, well, she wants him out, so I'm going to let her out. I'm going to let him out. And it was a few days later that she was brutally murdered. So here's the problem in so many of these cases. Our victims and survivors are scared. They've been convinced that the bad guy's got a lot more power and influence than he does. That's how they keep control. And so it's easier for them to appear to be on the bad guy's side and hope that the system does something anyway. You know, I want you released. I did everything I can do to get your charges dismissed, while secretly hoping that the system will do something. In most of those cases, when we don't have the cooperation and the advocation of the victim or the survivor, it's difficult for us to get results. So sometimes those are the kinds of cases where we have to make some kind of plea agreement. Now, I know the internet goes crazy about that. Why did they cut a plea for this abuser? Well, in many cases, even a lenient plea is better than losing the case and getting nothing. And in a lot of cases, that's the type of analysis that we have to make and the kind of weighing that we have to do. So if you want to see more punishment, if you want to see fewer domestic abuse, if you want to see victims having power over their own lives, the way to do that isn't to sit on social media and say, we need more punishment, we need more convictions, we don't need plea agreements. Then what you need to do instead is you need to figure out ways to encourage the people that you know. There's somebody watching this right now that has someone in their life that they know is being abused, and they're just sitting back and letting it happen. You need to encourage that person to come forward. It's not going to change until they do. And when they do come forward, you're going to have to encourage them to be brave and stay with it. You're going to have to advocate for yourself. If you want results, you have to advocate for yourself. Now, we'll provide all the support in the world to help you do that, but without friends and family that are also going to come forward and do that, it becomes much more difficult. So there's really the first step. We've got great resources. I mentioned Hope's Voice. I mentioned our victim advocate. Our law enforcement agencies, we provide them with a lot of training. They provide a lot of their own training on these cases. They're getting better and better each day, but until we get the victims and survivors educated, empowered, and willing to help us fight alongside us, then we're not going to make as big of a dent on this problem as we should.
You can view the entire interview with Prosecutor Carnahan on the Vincennes PBS YouTube channel. The back-to-school season brings a mix of excitement and anxiety for many children and their parents. The president of Mental Health America Knox County and mental health counselor at Vincennes University, Kathy Evans, is here today to talk about how to handle this season. Thanks for joining me today, Kathy.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Now that classes are in full swing here at VU, what's some of the biggest mental health struggles? Is it moving away from home for the first time, managing class loads, figuring out their future? What do you see as some of the big mental health struggles for Vincennes University students right now?
Well, certainly for first-time students, all those new things and those changes are creating some initial anxiety. We do find that for most of them, fairly quickly, they get into the routine, but of course, first day of class, you know, a lot of those beginning jitters. And then you, of course, have a subgroup of students who frankly struggle with both anxiety or depression or both, you know, having those things, or maybe some other mental health challenges. Maybe summer wasn't so great for those who went back home for the first time, or maybe they're coming out of high school and it's just a big transition and they're struggling with all the different changes related to that. And so sometimes we do see students who are, you know, struggling with those things, and we see they show up in our counseling center.
Right. So what does Vincennes University offer those students as far as services? Because I know, especially the first year students, this might be the first time they've ever had access to mental health care. Mm-hmm. So what all do you offer?
Well, we offer free mental health counseling to all students who are in classes. And so all they really have to do is to go to the Counseling Center website, which is vinu.edu and then /counseling, or else they can just Google Vincennes University Counseling Center, and and fill out an intake document. And once they fill out that document, we'll contact them and get them set up for an appointment. We work around their class schedule, so that's, and really, yeah, just every student is eligible for those services.
Okay, and are you in with the healthcare, the Vincennes University primary care clinic?
Actually not. We're actually in the back of the library.
Okay.
We're actually in the same office as the Office of Diverse Abilities and Accommodations. We share a secretary, but we are completely two separate offices as far as confidentiality. Right. And that is another piece I really want to bring to the table. Everything is completely confidential. It's just like walking into any other mental health center. We follow all the HIPAA guidelines. We follow our code of ethics. And so I think it's important that students understand. I always joke that no matter if a teacher came in or anybody came in and asked about it, we couldn't give them any information about whether they were seeking services or not.
Right. So. What do you think, as from your opinion, their students, you know, they come here to get an education, but what role does mental health care play in, you know, achieving that education and becoming adults? You know, what part does that play in their time here at Vincennes University?
I think it's a really important thing that it plays, and I think that they need to be paying attention to that right at the beginning. Now, there's the big three, you know, diet, sleep, and I don't like to use the word exercise, I'll be honest with you. I like to use the word movement. Mm-hmm. You know, getting going, getting movement. And then in addition to that, making social connections, making connections with other people so they don't feel isolated. Mm-hmm. So I really think that those are some really important things for mental health. If they're struggling with any of those things, that's where we can support them, brainstorm with them, give them some ideas. Maybe they don't know how to achieve those things, and so we can support them with that. But I think that if students can get off to that good start in those different areas, it can be really hard though. Right. I mean, it really can, particularly the sleep. We find a lot of students struggle with the whole sleep thing, but we can provide support.
I think
that's
not just for students, I think that's everybody.
You are absolutely right. I think every person, I think it's a very common complaint, mm-hmm. is struggling with sleep issues. So.
Right. Mm-hmm. So we've talked about students a little bit. What about parents? You know, what do you see as they send their students back, or some students at VU are living at home and then maybe there's these new routines. Do you have any advice for parents handling their own mental health as they go forward in this new step of life?
It's a new role. It's really, really difficult. I would say that there has to be this balance between support, but also letting them make their make their own, mistakes, as well as, making their own decisions. And I really think that that is a balancing act as students particularly go away to college for the first time. And hopefully, and then the other thing is just having, trying to have open conversations, just checking in every once in a while. How are things going? The student may or may not be ready to share that, but just always say, well, if you ever need to talk, I'm here for you. Right. I want to listen. I want to support you.
Right.
So.
You're plugged into several mental health entities around the area. What are some services for people that aren't VU students? They're just community members, and they're watching this and they think, I might, benefit from getting some mental health services. Where would you suggest they start looking, or where would you send them?
Well, there's a lot. I will say that there's a lot, but they're all very busy too. So, the Family Health Center has a walk-in clinic on Washington Avenue, and so that is certainly something that they could have access to. There are a large number of private mental health agencies in town, and to be honest with you, it's beyond what I could really go through today, but if they were interested, they could call 812-895-1007. That's Mental Health America's number, and I can give them access to those resources.
Okay, that's a great number to have. We talked about parents and college students, but we can't ignore the struggles that even, starting with preschool, kindergarten, up to grade 12, those students are going through struggles
Absolutely.
as well,
Absolutely.
So what are some things that parents can do to kind of keep an eye on their younger kids and kind of help them out and just kind of make good practices at home?
Well, there's one thing, and actually this is really true across the board, whether we're talking about a college student, a high school student, a grade school student. When there's a change, when there's a big change in their ability to function, in their ability to socialize, in their academics, maybe all of a sudden they're isolating in the room, and it's a big change from what's normal. I mean, we have some children who are more introverted and some children that are more extroverted, but if it's a huge change that you're noticing, that's when it's time to say something, and perhaps even you can always start with your primary care doctor and say, hey, I'm really concerned about this. I want some input about what to do.
Right.
Mental Health America actually has a website. It's mhanational.org, and there's screening tools out there where you can screen for different mental health conditions for children and adults to kind of see, well, should I be concerned? What does this say?
Right.
And based on your score, it gives suggestions about what to do next. So it's kind of a nice little tool that I recommend for parents or for adults who are kind of wondering, what's going on.
Right. And going hand in hand with that, talking about taking an internet quiz, but the internet and social media boundaries for parents. Do you have any guidelines for that, or any places for them to look? Because I know, it's everywhere, and kids' minds aren't really developed enough to maybe handle the entire internet.
No, it's really true that,
it.
Our brains don't fully develop until 24, with the prefrontal cortex, without getting too technical, is the thinking part of the brain, and it's just not fully developed.
Right.
And so we have to protect children. And I would say the younger a child is, the more protection is needed. There's a book called The Anxious Generation, and that particular book gives a lot of good information about what parents can do. But I would say that kids, like texting and things like that, kids do need access to their friends.
Right.
But once they start diving into social media, I would encourage them to read books like that and look at resources to learn more about, what are the things that students are using today in terms of social media. It literally changes, it seems like, from week to week, month to month, year to year. So, Snapchat was really, really big for a while, but I don't know if it's as, as popular now. And so it's really about being educated about what the latest thing is. And sometimes you can actually talk to your kids about that. Instead of saying, what are you doing on social media? You could say, well, what are kids doing?
Right.
Ask them you're really curious, you want to understand. Tell me a little bit more about what your friends are doing, instead of asking them about what they're doing. And then that can be another way of opening that conversation.
Yeah. Well, there's so much, and I'm just grateful that there are so many opportunities for people to reach out now. I feel like that's a big difference from even maybe 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
There's so many more services available. I feel like it's less taboo. And I just feel like, people like you are getting out, you're spreading the awareness, and you're talking about how important it is, and it's just part of our everyday health and life now.
Yeah. Another thing too with social media is it's good to get there's strength in numbers. So if you're a parent that's wanting to limit social media, finding other parents who also, so that you're not the only parent.
Right.
So there's always strength in numbers. So if you can find 2 or 3 parents, and maybe they're all your kids' friends, and you can talk to them and say, hey, I'm really, really concerned about this particular social media thing. We're going to limit that. What are your thoughts about, I think that there's strength in numbers, and if you're all doing it, then they can all commiserate they can all commiserate together. My parent won't let me, my parent won't let me either.
Right.
Where if they feel like they're the only one, sometimes it's a little bit harder.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for all of this great information today, Kathy. I really appreciate you coming on and talking about it all.
Thank you.
Once again, for local resources, you can call 812-895-1007, or for more information, you can visit vincennes.pbs.org. The annual Suicide Prevention Walk, hosted at Vincennes University, serves as a memorial for some, but also hopes to raise awareness about mental health issues. This year's theme was United in the War.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light?
My mental health struggles started in the military. As a survivor of MST and other traumas in the military, I did what the military taught you to do. You buried that stuff deep and you don't talk about it. And I did that. I did that really well. And no one knew anything I had went through until about 18 months ago.
Irreverent Warriors is a non-for-profit whose mission is to bring veterans together using humor and camaraderie to improve mental health and prevent veteran suicide. What that means for our community is hosting events and bringing partners on board to help bridge the gap and create connections for veterans and even civilians. To help bring people out of isolation and work on that mental health front to break the isolation, which is one of the #1 factors in suicide prevention.
You can look strong and still be breaking. And when you're breaking, what most of us do, and what I did, is we hide it. In order for us to defeat this war and win the war on suicide prevention and suicide loss, we have to take off our mask. One of the worst lies that we ever say is, hey, how are you doing? Oh, I'm great, or I'm good. And for me as a pastor, I always ask people twice. I'm like, hey, how you doing? They're like, good. I'm like, well, how are you really? Like, people care about you and people love you. But if we don't tell people, then they never know.
So much of mental health in the military and especially in church is to hide it and to pray it away or whatever else. And that kind of created a stigma where I didn't want to talk about it. And when you don't talk about it, the darkness kind of feeds the depression because you're hiding it and you're not working through it. And through that, my mental health continued to get worse and worse and worse until I came to the conclusion that I wanted to kill myself, even as a pastor and a Christian and a husband.
I'm here for multiple reasons. My mom, as a kid, she went through so much with my grandma, and she fought her own battle. She attempted and survived miraculously. I've struggled myself. We've lost many people to suicide. My dad's dad, he hung himself when my dad was really young. So having my dad here is like really powerful for me and for him to see that I've gotten as far as I have. We've lost so many people to overdoses. And it's just one of those things where it's like I'm here for myself, but for so many people that we've lost.
That's all for this edition of First City Focus. For everyone here at Vincennes PBS, I'm Allison Bowers. Join us again next week.
First City Focus is supported in part by Duke Energy, powering the lives of its customers and communities. Online at duke-energy.com. Andy Ellerman of First City Wealth, serving Vincennes and surrounding communities to help with investing and planning for your future before and during retirement years. First City Wealth online at firstcitywealth.com. Colonial Assisted Living. Colonial is an assisted living residence, promoting independence and dignity for each resident while providing the necessary assistance for daily living. Colonial Assisted Living, 1622 South Hart Street Road in Vincennes, 812-895-1504. And by donations contributed by Vincennes PBS viewers like you. Thank you.